Well, good day to everybody. Welcome to another edition of Calmly Considered here at Faith Seeking Understanding University, a completely made up university. And I am the self-appointed, because it's completely made up, I'm the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture at Faith Seeking Understanding University, where all seekers are invited to come and ponder profound things free of charge. And Michael Cruz is in conversation with me today, and he is the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology here at FSUU. And Michael, how are you today?
I am doing well. How are you, Allan?
I'm doing well too. So we always talk a little bit of sports,
right?
Your Chiefs, they, I don't know. I mean, they pulled that game off and won that, but
yeah,
it was at the beginning. It was looking just a little shaky.
I think that's their biggest comeback in regular season.
Yeah,
17 down, 17 points and winning like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was online or social media somewhere. I was having a conversation with, and I said, "Yeah, they're 17 points down, but it's like this is the Chiefs. I mean." That doesn't mean the game's over. And many times that means the game's just starting.
They
pulled it out. They got lots of help from the Raiders, timely penalties on the Raiders, and then at the end of the game, the two receivers running into each other. It's like, thank you very much. We appreciate that. I tell you, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that happen in a football game.
It's a lot of let's throw a little Keystone Cops in there with the game, right?
So.
Interesting. My wife had the game on Monday night, and she said to me, I was in the kitchen, but she said to me, she said, Patrick Mahomes is a lot of fun to watch.
He is, yeah.
And he is. Yep. He's athletic, and he's just, it is a lot of fun to watch him. That's the one thing I miss about not watching much football since I have given it up for life.
Yeah.
Or at least temporarily, is that, it's like Nick Chubb, for the Browns running back. He is just fun to watch. Yeah. And there's just certain players that it's just, you just kind of sit there and you're just amazed at some of the stuff they're able to do. And Patrick Mahomes is certainly one of them.
Yeah, Kansas City's blessed to have Mahomes on the Chiefs, and then we got Salvador Perez on the Royals.
Yeah.
And both of the players just exude excitement and childlikeness in their play and everything. Yeah. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. Wow. And so speaking of the Royals baseball, my Guardians are down 1-0 on the Yankees. I said we got to get out of New York splitting one, so we got to win tonight, or we're really going to be behind it. But I think the only way we win this series is if our pitching is just as stellar as it's been in the past, because we can't out-hit the Yankees. I don't think.
You can't make any mistakes.
So we've really got to. The pitching has really got to come through for us. But it's as I say to people, winning is great, and when you beat the Yankees, it's just extra special. So
that is special sauce on top.
It's just special sauce on top. So we've got to do this, but we'll see. Yep. What I'm excited about and I think you mentioned this with the Royals, is that I think what we've done with this young team is that we're building up a contender for the next few years.
Yeah, it'll be fun,
and so next season will be exciting. And maybe the Royals and the Guardians will be more in competition for the division.
I hope so.
Okay. Well, all right. On to other things. We've got an election coming up, a midterm election.
Do we?
And yes, we do. By the way, I watched a segment of news this morning on younger voters who didn't even know that there's a midterm election.
Good heavens. Yeah.
And just out of touch. Now, there's nothing new about this. I mean, younger voters have tended to be the least consistent when it comes to voting. Older folks are, as we get older, we vote more consistently. I can say that. I vote in every election, but now, but I can't say I did that when I was in my 20s. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's just the cycle of life, but but in a midterm election, I think about all of those who are registered to vote. About 43% of the electorate turns out in an off-year election, a non-presidential election, which is a little disconcerting for me. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but
right.
I mean, I always want to say, I've been to Cuba, where they don't have elections, and when they do, they're not elections, which is why, every time there was an election, Fidel Castro could come out and say he won with 100% of the vote, because there's only one candidate you should vote for, and if you don't vote for the candidate, someone's going to pay you a visit, right?
Exactly. Yes. Right.
So, but I think of my friends down there, they would love to have a free election. They would love to have a free and fair election.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess it's you don't appreciate what you have when you're in the midst of it.
Yeah. Well, now I know, going back into my high school years and college years, multiple times I was exposed to the issues surrounding the civil rights movement. And of course, the whole issue there was African Americans getting the right to vote in the South, and seeing those lines of people lined up at voter registration centers being turned back by police with dogs, and the whole thing there sort of etched in my mind from a very, very early time that this is an important civic right that I have, and I'm going to exercise it.
And I think in some states like Georgia and Arizona, in Florida, we're kind of seeing what I'm calling Jim Crow 2.0,
right?
As ways, not that overt, but subtle ways to disenfranchise minority votes, all in the name of election security. Creating a problem, creating a solution for a problem that didn't exist. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that a little bit. Okay. So let's kind of think about. Let me hear what do you think is going to happen? I've got that. I've got the website 538.com, and I'll put that in the description. I'm not going to call it up here on the screen, but it's they do. You're familiar with the place, and in fact, you've got a connection to somebody who's there that you can talk about. But I like following them. They do a lot of stuff, not just with politics. But they've got a projection that basically 60-some% chance that Republicans take the House, and is it 70-some% chance that the Democrats keep the Senate?
I think it's actually around 67% chance that the Democrats keep the Senate, 70% chance Republicans take the House.
Gotcha. I got it reversed. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So the first thing I want to ask before we get into that is this is an off-year election in a president's first term. The Republicans really should be under normal circumstances in a real position to take both, right? I mean, we know this happens, that the party not in the White House in an off-year election tends to lose seats in both chambers, and yet it's not that clear. Any thoughts as to why that is?
Well, I mean, and effectively, not just a midterm election, but you're also in an economy that is effectively in a recession, and then you have inflation on top of that. Economy tends to be a big influencer in how people vote. So yes, and all other things being equal, which they never are, but all other things being equal, you would expect that this should be possibly a Republican landslide. I mean, based on what's there. So I used to follow polling a lot more rigorously up until about 10 years ago than I do now. And I don't discount it altogether, but to me, it just seems like it is becoming less and less of it's losing some of its weight in terms of being able to forecast exactly what's going to happen. We had this conversation a while before we got on here, just talking about the 2016 election, that Nate Silver did his projections for who was going to win the presidency. I think it was the day before the election or something like that. And he gave Hillary Clinton a 71.4% chance of winning the election. And that was based on polling. All of the major polls also indicated that was going to be the case. And what we should point out is it does say 71%, which means 1 in 4 times it doesn't happen. It's like, in football, you say the guy's got a 1 in 4 chance of hitting this field goal. Well, if he hits it, that doesn't mean that the projections are wrong. It just means he got lucky on that one occasion. All the stars lined up the right way for that one particular moment, and it happened. So it doesn't mean the projections are wrong, but other stuff happens.
Yeah.
And some stuff gets missed, and more stuff keeps getting missed because it's more and more difficult to get a stratified random sample of voters to get to accurate read. So you're left with increasingly high levels of complicated algorithms to try to adjust for people they don't have information about. I will mention this, which I thought was interesting. I saw an article about Michael Moore, not necessarily one of my favorite public figures, but I do find it interesting to hear how his take on things. In the 2016 election, he had been traveling around the country listening to Trump voters and listening to people in all these places that were swing states. And he kept coming on the news program saying that all these polls were wrong, that Donald Trump would win this election, that, it wasn't even a doubt to him that was what was going to happen. And sure enough, it happened. What the reason for the article that I read was saying, he is now saying that he thinks that the Democrats will retain the Senate and possibly pick up seats in the House. And he said he thinks the polls are underestimating the energy and the vibrancy of what's happening with the Democrats, and particularly on issues around abortion and things like that, are simply not registering well in those polls for a variety of reasons. For a lot of the same kind of reasons that happened in 2016. Now, I don't put all my weight on any one individual's analysis of things, but I do think it's interesting that he is somebody who takes a different strategy at trying to discern what's happening. And he certainly got it right that last time. And I don't know. I mean, when I looked, I could see the Republicans picking up 12, 15 seats, and I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't totally surprise me if the Democrats ended up netting 3 or 4. I mean, anything in between that is, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking of Michael Moore, and I'm not a huge fan of him for different reasons, but he does. I mean, I think what he tries to do, some of his analysis is trying to get drilled down, because the polls. I don't predict anything anymore in elections, Michael. Yeah. I've been wrong so often in this last decade. I don't do it anymore. I do not do it anymore. I just simply say whatever, we'll see, because I just it's just like, if you like to bet on anything, don't ask me for my opinion, because you'll lose. Right. I mean, it's getting harder to do, and it's harder. But it is interesting that in this time, things are closer than historically they would be for the party not in the White House. I think that part of it is that I think two things get your response to. The first thing, I think there's some just really, I'm going to call them very weak candidates in the Republican Party. I mean, Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, and there's others. We won't go down the list that are just not, strong candidates. And before you send me emails, yes, there are times when Democrats don't have strong candidates either, but right now, and I think, by the way, I think that goes to Donald Trump. I want to say this, and that is that I think Donald Trump is not, if water seeks its own level, so does intelligence. Right. And I don't think Donald Trump's the sharpest pencil in the box. It's not because that there's issues he says I agree with or disagree with. I just don't think he's the sharpest pencil in the box. And I think that has attracted candidates who are not, and when I say not, I don't necessarily mean that their IQs are really low. I just mean that on these issues of politics, they're not strong. They're not sharp. Right. And I think that's also part of the problem. I think right now, with the way things are going, that if you had a Republican Senate candidate in Georgia and one in Pennsylvania who, was a top-notch kind of a Ben Sass, for example, who
Right.
will
Yeah.
be retiring from the Senate, a Ben Sass, a Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
I think if you had a candidate like that, I don't think right now, I mean, I think these races would be pretty much decided.
I don't think you even have to go that far. I mean, I think like what's his name, Youngkin in Virginia, who won in Virginia, who's not necessarily, he's certainly not. He dallied with with Trump, was supportive of him, but he was also cogent in his thinking and made arguments that were rational, and I think that persuaded a lot of swing voters that might have otherwise voted against the Republican. And I think that's what several of these, like Herschel Walker and Oz and some, they just don't know how to, and they may still win, but but I think that's they have made it more difficult for them.
Right. And that's my argument. I'm not saying they won't necessarily win, but it's that it shouldn't be as close. And that's the reason as to what's happening. Yeah.
Right.
So what do you think? Let's talk. And what we're not going to do here is evaluate issues, good or bad. That's not what our task is. But there is some polling. Here we go again. Some polling that suggests that the abortion issue has cooled off for some people, and that that might be less of a motivator for Democrats to get out in a couple of weeks. But then there is other. Well, but then let me do a Michael Moore here and say, just from what I see on social media, I don't see any cooling off of the passion to vote in November because Roe was overturned by those who are Democrats or liberals. I don't, if I have to gauge that, and that's not scientific, but if I have to gauge that, they look pretty energized to me.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Right here where I'm at, just across the state line in Kansas, they had a vote about whether or not to basically undo what the Supreme Court had ruled, that the woman has a right to privacy and abortion, that type of thing, to the Kansas Supreme Court, and a law to undo that. And I think the polling then suggested that it would probably win by about just barely over 50% margin. It ended up going down in flames. With about 58% of people voting against and 42 in favor. That may not be exactly right, but anyway, it was a sizable defeat. And those polls thoroughly underestimated the level of intensity and organization of people that were motivated by the abortion issue. And there have been other more local races, just handful of special elections elsewhere, where the polling came out and it radically underestimated the Democratic turnout to vote for those candidates in those areas. And that's we're talking the past month or two, and not back at the beginning of the year. So I don't know. Like I say, how do you measure that? How can you know for certain? But I don't have any sense that much has changed. And in fact, if anything, I think these people have been making their building up their PACs and the money right now in October. I saw one article that said that that's what the Democrats are going to hammer from now to the election is the abortion issue. That's going to be the single biggest thing that they're spending money for ads on. So they think it's an issue. Maybe
November's episode that we do should be about where we were wrong with the election. That we might have to take 2 hours for that. I mean, but it is. Well, it's a testament to me. I've said this for a long, long time. Is that Dean Merrill, who at one time was part of the moral majority in Jerry Falwell's group, and he sort of moderated out some of his positions. And he says in one of his books that I have, that's really a decent book, written 30 years ago, but he says, the law is a modest helper. And we really need to be careful about thinking we can settle everything by law, because all that does, first of all, it whips people up. It's like what I said. I've, as a pastor, I have always tried to get a consensus to do something and not have a vote, because when you have a vote, you have losers, and you don't want to have losers. And so, it just seems to me that this is abortion, Roe v. Wade, and all of it is an example of what happens when you think the way to solve something is by the law. Now, partly I understand the default of wanting to do that because our electorate is polarized, but you know, it might have been helpful if Congress would have done the hard work over the past 30, 40, 50 years after Roe to try to come to some consensus on this issue. And again, I'm not doing moral evaluation. I'm not doing moral evaluation. I'm just simply saying it would have been, one of the things that has bothered me is that because Congress is now so polarized, particularly the House is just terrible, that nothing gets done. And that all these representatives are doing is running for re-election the minute they get in office. And I always say, I don't know what the point is of having power if you can't use it to seek the common good. But I guess you like the perks. But what that has done is it is when Republicans say that, well, it's not just the Democrats, it's them too. But when they have said in the past, talk about the problem of legislating from the bench. The answer is yes, that's a problem. But by the way, you guys are thick into it too, as far as legislating from the bench, and that this is ultimately not healthy because at least if you put people in office who work toward trying to at least ameliorate our issues, if not solve them, it's much easier to accept that. It's much easier to accept the fact that I voted for my candidate, but my candidate didn't get enough votes. Then, other than trying to what Trump tried to do is get himself reinstalled by the courts because of this, his fantasies, his made up stuff that he does. I was thinking the other day listening to him talk on something that he just makes stuff up off the top of his head. That whatever he wants to be true, he just says it, and therefore it's true. So anyway, go ahead.
Just piggybacking on that, I was reading somewhere, I forget what the author's name was, but she was pointing out, she said, we're talking about fact checking. And so she said, trying to fact check these things that Trump and people like Trump say is pointless in terms of changing their minds or their most devoted followers. Because what Trump is not telling you the truth. He's not even attempting to tell you the truth. He's telling you what he needs to be true in order for his agenda to happen that he wants to happen. So therefore, the agenda is what's critical to him. And so therefore, he'll state whatever is acceptable to advancing that agenda. And so therefore, fact checking it is pointless because the fact check just becomes your admission that you're opposed to his agenda. And so she gave the caveat that she's not saying we shouldn't fact check. Things should be fact checked, but that is not an effective persuasion tool at changing people's mind. Fact checking.
When these fact checkers came out a decade and a half ago and really started to get some traction, I was excited about that. And I thought, but one thing we have learned is people don't care. Most people don't care. They know what they know. They know who they're voting for. They know what they believe. And you're right. If someone fact checks something and says what Trump or what Biden said, doesn't matter, is false, their supporters just, they're in the tank for the other, and by the way, and for Christians, this should be a real problem because Stanley Hauerwas says is that if there's one thing the church owes to the larger world, it's to tell the truth.
Exactly.
And I'm not so sure there's a whole lot of truth telling happening among Christians right now. And
I just want to piggyback on something you actually said before that, which I think you were hitting at something that is so crucial to me. You were talking about if policy gets passed, you try to get your politician elected, your politician get elected, policy happens well, you can get your politician, the next time. That right there is the central core, most important thing about a democratic system. Because as long as the minority has the option and the ability to say, hey, if I get together with other people and I can persuade enough people, then I can overcome, what things I think have been done incorrectly and take them my direction. As long as they know that they have that option in the future, that's what gives you the ability to persevere with something that you don't like in the short term in order to be able to work for the thing that you want in the future. That'll make a difference which side of the issue you're on, because there's always going to be somebody that's on the out in terms of what happened like that. When you begin to take the system and create this big lie that the election's rigged and all this, BS that of trying to suppress the vote and all that kind of thing, and you create a world in which the people who are on the outside feel like they have no hope of getting done what they think needs to be done through the electoral system, that's where you create deterioration of the society, deterioration of trust, violence, all those things begin to develop when you do that. And to me, that is the base thing that I look at when I look at politicians and what they are doing in terms of the political sphere is, are they going to honor that system of doing that? That's the first and foremost thing.
Right. Yeah. I have I think and there's nothing profound about what I'm about to say, but I just think it's going to be interesting after election day, because I think what's going to happen, what you're going to see is you're going to see places where Republicans win. Of course, the election was fair, and places where they lose, it was rigged or something. There were irregularities. And of course, then Trump will be, I don't know what you do on Truth Social, whether you tweet or twit or whatever you do, but Trump will be on Truth Social commenting and of course making it about himself, as he always does. And so it'll be interesting to see in what places is there are there real problems. And here's one concern I have. I'll mention this to you. I'm concerned about the attorney generals who are election deniers. There's several of them in different states, because as the way this is supposed to work, right? Whoever gets elected, and then I think it's the attorney general who certifies the election. What are you going to do? What do you do if you get some election denier who's bound to determine that if the other side wins, he or she is not going to certify the election? Now, obviously that will go to court, but this is this is a concern of mine. I don't lay awake at night thinking about it, but it is a concern that when you've got people in these offices who are so unmoored from the truth, it just leads to more headaches.
I mean, we're in uncharted territory. I don't think we know exactly what will happen with some of these. At one level, it's disconcerting. At another level, I think if we look back through American history, there have been corrupt politicians, corrupt political processes all through American history in states, and we managed to survive and overcome those. Doesn't mean it was pretty or that it was just by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not sure it means the ending of the American experiment if we have some bad apples that end up emerging. And in fact, I guess that's one of the things that I keep coming back to when I think about some of the things that have happened in American history, and what we're experiencing right now it seems odd to us because it seems so out of the norm for our lifetimes, but in previous lifetimes, many similar things like this have happened as well. And part of it is that I think democracy is always continuously being contested. And so this is our generation's opportunity to fight for what we think the truth is, that provides that balance between power being too centralized or too decentralized, and trying to keep that balance that democracy gives us. So this, in some ways, what it means is democracy is alive, that we're having this debate, that we're fighting for.
That's right. That's excellent. I was the other night, I was in the National Archives on my computer, and I was reading letters from Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Yes, I'm a nerd and I have no life, but I was reading some of their letters, which, first of all, I just love the way they talk. I mean, they use language that we don't use today. I do just, but it was reinforced. It was a reinforcement to me that they weren't sure how this thing was going to go. They had hopes, but when your world up until that point has all been monarchy, they and the belief that elites, I don't like conservatives misuse the term elite, but you know, the educated and, you know, the people of higher class are the only ones who should be running the government. They're not sure that this is going to, they're not sure about this. They're just not sure. And I always say that the most significant thing one of the most significant things that John Adams did when he lost his election to Jefferson in 1800, even though he was sulking, even though he didn't stay for the Jefferson's inauguration, the most important thing he did was just leave Washington.
Yeah.
Most important thing he did. Yeah. Because it set a precedent, right?
Right.
But you know, okay, let me move then into what I was going to say. Connected to that, I am not I'm not a Chicken Little. I'm not one of these guys who, you know, I've got some people are saying democracy is at stake and we're going to lose our democracy and all this. If Trump runs and gets elected, democracy is over. I think if Trump runs and gets reelected, I think it's going to be a continued strain and more misery and a real problem. Right. But I don't think democracy is dead. And you know, because I think what you see happening, and this is where we will probably lose some listeners when I say this, but I think what's happening is when you see what's going on in Texas and Georgia and Arizona and the election denial and the move to what I think is suppress votes, particularly minority votes, I think this is the last gasp of white supremacy in America. I'm not going to use the word supremacy because that, let me not use that word because that conjures up, you know, neo-Nazis. White normality, that the white folks running the show and the minorities are free but just happy to be governed in a free society. And I think that's what this is. It's the last gasp of white normality, and it's not going to prevail because the demographics are changing. And I also remember the civil rights movement. I mean, if you want to talk about a real attempt to keep things in the hands and keep things white normal, you know, when you talk about the real acts of voting suppression, of violence, and the things happening in the 60s, and yet the civil rights movement prevailed. Civil rights legislation was signed, and we began to move forward after that. And so you can't tell me at this point that if what happened in the 60s failed, the attempt to suppress all of this, if that failed, what's going on now is not going to succeed. I mean, it's going to create some misery, and, you know, in the short term, you know, we're going to have some issues, but overall, it's going to die. Right.
And for those people who think in terms of legacies that they want to leave, I just cringe for some of the folks, friends that I know and people that I interact with who are so adamantly behind this big lie and the whole Trumplican stuff that 20, 30 years from now, their kids or grandkids are going to be looking back and reflecting on who their parents were, and they're going to see images that to them look like those gnarled up faces angry at the Black folks coming into their schools in Little Rock, Arkansas. And, you know, that's the image that they're going to have. And that's the legacy that they're leaving, that their children are going to remember. And that's sad.
Yes. And is that like, you know, I think about my grandchildren. I don't want to be in, you know, some of those famous pictures from the civil rights era from the 60s with whites protesting and different things. And I don't want to be in a situation like that where my grandchildren look back on, they look on a famous picture taken in 2023 and in the midst of a protest, which, you know, and say, you know, that's my Gramps.
Right.
Why was he there? Right. I don't want that.
Yes.
And I think there are a lot of people who, when history is being written on this thing, that's exactly right. They're going to go down. And I don't like the right side, wrong side of history conversation, because I think it's fraught with problems. But I think if there is a time to say that, it's here. And that is that a lot of these people, history will be the judge. And even though they were sincere and they had reasons why they did what they did, they're not going to end up looking good. They're not going to end up looking good. And some of the politicians, you know, now, unless they don't care about legacy, mean, if you got a politician who doesn't care about their legacy, but what is history going to write about certain persons now? I mean, that matters to me. I'd kind of like to leave a decent legacy. I don't want to be immortalized, but I would like people to say, that I did my best to, in the words of Micah, seek justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God, even though I failed at that at times, to be sure. I agree. I think that they're forging something in the present that in the future it's, I don't know what else to say.
Cringeworthy.
It's cringeworthy. Yeah. And I think that's what's going on, and that's too bad. So let's talk a little bit about Christianity, Christians and voting. You and I did have a little bit of a conversation about this beforehand, and I'll mention to you the story I told you is having been to Cuba a dozen times over the years to teach pastors at the Methodist Seminary in Havana there. And I've got good friends down there and who would love the opportunity to actually vote in a free and fair election. Cuba has elections in the past. I don't know if those elections will get any better with the current regime down there. I'm not, betting the farm on it. But Castro would win, Fidel Castro would win, and he would come out the next day, won with 100% of the votes. Well, my friends have told me what those ballots were like. You get a piece of paper and it's got the name of Fidel there with a box to check, and then it's got a box below it with a blank so you can write in somebody's name. And if you don't, and by the way, you have to sign your name to the ballot. So everybody votes for Fidel because no one wants to, And so then he can say, we won with 100% of the vote, and it's comical. But my friends would love a chance to vote in an election. So what do you think? How important is it, the fact that we do get to vote in what I'm going to call a democratic oligarchy? Because I think that's what we really are, a democratic oligarchy. But we do get a chance to vote. What do you think? Important? Yeah.
Well, in my experience, and I won't go into all details of this, but in my high school years back in the 1970s, which was not long after Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, and tail end of the heyday of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, of all the laws that had passed, a lot of my high school classes and into college, we watched video and saw the story about the civil rights movement in the South and Black voters in the South going to courthouse to register to vote and being turned away and denied, and learning about those whole things. And that instilled in me this idea that what we just take so for granted as white Americans is not the norm for everybody. And it is this great freedom that we have, however small it may seem. That freedom is important, and it has always been instilled within me that voting is important. I try to vote every single election. I don't always vote for a candidate for every office. There have been occasions where I just decided I would not cast my vote for any candidate in that position. But the idea of going to the ballot box and being able to make my voice heard to the ballot is just, to me, is almost a ritual that reinforces my commitment to the American experiment and democracy.
So along with what you said, that you don't always necessarily vote for a particular candidate or a particular office. I'll tell you another story. Back in 2016, before the 2016 election, when it was clear, once it was clear that our serious choices would be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. And I knew that in my conscience, I couldn't vote for either one. Because I frankly think that, of course, Donald Trump, he's corrupt. He's just corrupt. And I think the Clintons got some corruption on them too, to be honest.
I think you're right.
And I had made the decision, and I wrote a blog post about this, why I couldn't vote for either one. I always love the response when I would say that. People would say, well, there's no perfect candidate. I always love that response. Like, I'm looking for, well, that's why I'm not voting, because there's no perfect candidate, right? But you know, just what a
And in the
stupid.
past, I always found perfect candidates.
Yeah,
That's
it's
why I
all in the
voted
past.
for
I
them.
always found perfect candidates, and we're, you know, so it's like, you know, what kind of a response is that? That's a non-response, is what it is.
Right.
But I just have felt, and you know, and again, no candidate is morally perfect, but I felt that these two crossed the line, and that
Yeah.
I couldn't do it, and I wasn't putting that on anybody else. I wasn't saying you should, you know, Michael, you shouldn't vote for either one either. I wasn't saying that. I was saying, here's the decision I made, and I made clear that I was going to vote, and I was going to vote down ticket, but
Right.
I wasn't going to vote for them. And I also said, and this was what really got people irritated, was I said, I'm not going to do a write-in, and I'm not going to vote for the Libertarian candidate or those other candidates who never have a shot at it.
Right.
Because to me, it's just not to me, that's wasting a vote, just like not voting at all. And so I'm not going to do that. Michael, the response was unbelievable from Christians.
Yeah.
You would have thought, you know, that I denied some cardinal doctrine of the faith.
Right.
And to me, that makes voting a fetish.
Yeah. Right.
And so while I want to affirm what you just said, the importance of voting, I vote.
Right.
But, you know, is it really an obligation from a Christian perspective to vote? Is that like a requirement?
Right.
I mean, we can make arguments why it's a good idea, right? But as a Christian, do I have some like Christian obligation to cast a vote?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think that's a discernment as to how you see your role in terms of advancing the best for society. When I was in graduate school, I used to be in a Bible study with a couple of Mennonites, who never voted, and would never vote. And one of them was an older gentleman who had been a conscientious objector during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine being a conscientious objector during World War II and how well that went over with, you know, with folks? He stood very much by his principles. I appreciated the commitment that he had towards the idea of his Anabaptist theology. I'm not of that theology. I mean, that's not where I'm at, although I have a great deal of admiration, and there are aspects of it that I find extremely compelling.
Yeah.
But I think that mine is more towards looking for the good that can be done. I hear people talk about in elections like 2016, well, they voted for the lesser of two evils. And my point would be, if I voted for one of those candidates, I too would be voting for the lesser of two evils. But what it means is I still voted for an evil.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as a Christian, it's incumbent upon me to be honest and truthful about the evil of the person that I voted for.
Yeah.
And that's what people, frustrates me to some degree. They'll say, I voted for the lesser of two evils, and then they will defend everything that this lesser evil did, no matter what they said or did.
Exactly.
Well, you just said that you voted for an evil. So what was evil about the person, though? Be specific. So I can understand that sometimes people are trying to weigh a balance, that they think there's a significant reason for why this lesser evil is better than not voting at all.
Yeah.
But that is not carte blanche to then just become a total, you know, cult follower of the person you voted for. So it was my Christian conscience that couldn't allow me to vote for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Right.
I wasn't putting that on everybody else. I wasn't saying, now, if you're a Christian, you should do the same, because you know, we Protestants, by the way, we recognize conscience. We recognize the importance of conscience. And so maybe somebody's Christian conscience and the way they think about their faith and, you know, pack all that together, maybe they voted, even if reluctantly, for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. I get that. I always say I understood why people voted for Donald Trump in 2016. I don't get if someone, after all of this, would vote for him in 2024. That I completely don't get. But you know, I think we can make a good case for why voting is important. I don't think as Christians we have to baptize it. And that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
As a citizen of the kingdom of God, I'm here as an alien, and an alien in this country, this world. I have the opportunity to vote,
Yep.
And that is an important way, I think, in which Christians can contribute to the better of society. But
Yeah.
it is not a requirement of being in the kingdom of heaven that you vote in the kingdoms of this earth.
Yeah.
It's a decision that has to be made in terms of what best advances the greater good for all of humanity. And responsible people, well-thinking people, have come down on different sides of that in the Christian faith as to whether they think they should be voting or not.
Yeah.
And I can honor that. For me, I think the democratic system has been remarkable development in human history in terms of trying to find that balance between power being too centralized or too decentralized, and in finding a way to help a way forward. And so I want to participate with that in terms of promoting it for the future. That does not by any stretch say that it came down from heaven or that it is perfect, and so therefore it requires some discernment as to how you participate in that. That would be my thoughts.
Yeah, I think one of the genius insights of the founders was, regardless of what their views of human nature were, John Adams was more negative, Thomas Jefferson more positive. Whatever their views on human nature, they understood that you can't trust people with power, which is why they put checks and balances in, which is why they said, okay, because once you give people power, it does corrupt. And so what bothers me right now is I think that we have got corrupt people doing exactly what Isaiah warns God's people of. It said, beware of those who call good evil and evil good. And that's what we've got with what I keep calling the Trump-Putin wing of the Republican Party. And that is that what's corrupt is good and what is good is corrupt. And that's when you start to get concerned, when you can't name it. Well, just like you said about supporting a candidate, I have never, every candidate I voted for president and who has become president has done things I like and things I don't. I don't have any stake in supporting who I vote, justifying my vote by getting on board with everything that they want to do. I just don't have a stake in it.
Right. Exactly. Right.
Okay. Yeah. So let's wind it down a little bit. What you have any? I know you don't want to prognosticate too much and be careful, but and for those of you watching or listening, Michael Cruz is not a bookie, but do you have a leanings? I mean, and I know you're saying I have no idea, and we don't have any idea, but do you have a leaning? Do you have a leaning towards the Senate? Do you have a leaning toward the House as far as the congressional elections?
Yeah, it feels to me like the Senate would probably stay with the Democrats, and it may be exactly a 50-50 split again. I think it could go, my sense is it could go one seat either direction. Could go 51 Democrats, 51 Republicans. I mean, it's the races are so narrow. And to be honest, we're still 4 weeks away from the actual election, and who knows what happens between now and then. Something could emerge. But standing where we're at right now, that's my sense of things. I think the chances are of the Democrats retaining the House are higher than is being broadcast, but I still suspect the Republicans will narrowly take the House. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. You talked about 3 weeks from the election. I mean, 1 week's an eternity in politics. I mean, right? I mean, one thing can happen a week before the election. Of course, we do have early voting, and that has also been an issue as far as how you prognosticate within the last month. But all you need is one big thing, and it just changes everything. So we don't know.
Right. Yeah. What do you think? What's your sense?
I do sense that the Democrats keep the Senate. I don't know by how much, but I do think they keep the Senate. But I just kind of think the Republicans are going to take the House. I think they are. Republican, the House members don't get the press the senators do. They don't get the news coverage, which is another intangible. But I think there has been enough scrutiny of senators, Herschel Walker, Oz, Mehmet Oz, and some of these other candidates. But Pennsylvania is interesting because you've got the Democratic candidate Fetterman, who's had this stroke, and that doesn't mean he can't serve. God forbid we ever start saying if you've got some kind of disability you can't serve.
Right.
But it does leave an impression, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know about that, but I do kind of think that the Republicans will take the House. I don't know that it'll be by a lot, but in the House, you don't, unlike the Senate, you can have a slim majority and still do what you want.
That's all you need. Yep. Right.
Yeah. So
50% plus one.
Yeah. So I think that's what's going on. I I read a, I think it was on 538 saying that, at least from the polling they have done, that the population in general, they are now saying is less likely to vote for a Democratic senator, but more likely to vote for a Democratic governor.
Yeah, I saw a headline to that effect.
Yeah, and I don't know if that has to do with issues going on in the state level, with governors who, whether it's Texas or Georgia, some of the stuff that's happening, like Florida, where Ron DeSantis is out trumping Trump, which has got Trump angry. You can't, because you can't do Trump better than Trump. Right. Which isn't, of course, a compliment on my end, but he's out trumping Trump. I think maybe that's it. That they feel like there are some Republican governors that are too unhinged. Right. Whereas they see what's going on with the Senate and maybe are less likely to vote for Democrats since they control the Senate all by a little margin.
And what's interesting is I read that, I saw the headline, and it was right next to an article that was talking about the split ticket voting has been declining over the years.
Yes.
So it was so where you got a Senate and a gubernatorial race in the same state, and you want one in one party, one out. So which factor holds greater sway? I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch. I always enjoy seeing the results afterwards. Gives you insights into what you didn't see before. But we'll see.
We'll come back next month, whatever our subject is. Maybe we can do a little postmortem and on the election and do a little, but gosh, we'll see anyway.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So we hope you all get out and vote. We think it's a good idea, unless your conscience tells you it's something you can't do. That's okay, because we accept the importance of conscience here at Faith Seeking Understanding University. I am Allan Bevere, and our patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding University's Anselm of Canterbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, former Archbishop of Canterbury, who said, "I do not have faith to understand. I do not."
Are you sure he said that?
I don't know. It could be fake news. I do not. I do not understand so as to believe, but I believe so as to understand. There, I got it done. Michael, thanks as always for the good conversation.
Thank you.
And we will see you all on this show again in a month. So take care.
All right. Bye.